I have served the Duke of Thornwall for 19 years, and in all that time I have never once seen him uncertain. He was born without it, or so the world believed. Certain of his rank, certain of his word, certain that warmth was a currency wasted on servants and tenants, and whatever woman the solicitors placed in front of him next. I ironed his coats, and I poured his port, and I pressed his letters flat, and I did not speak unless spoken to, which was the arrangement and the law of Thornwall House, and I would not have it any other way. Until the morning Miss Cecily Wren arrived at the east portico in a hired carriage with one trunk and no maid, and everything I believed about the Duke of Thornwall began, slowly and then all at once, to come undone. I should begin at the proper place, which is not the morning she arrived, but the evening 3 months prior, when His Grace sat opposite the family solicitor in the study, and signed the document that made her his wife-in-law, sight unseen. I poured the brandy. I did not look at the paper. I had learned long ago that a valet who reads the papers gets dismissed, and I intended to remain at Thornwall until I died or the house fell into the sea, whichever came first. Mr. Norris was the solicitor, a neat, efficient man with the manner of someone who has spent 40 years reducing complicated human situations to their legal essentials. He spread the contract across the desk with the gesture of a man presenting a perfectly assembled machine. It was, I supposed, a machine of a kind. 2 signatures, a year, £300, and the orderly discharge of the Wren family's considerable debt. "That concludes it," Mr. Norris said, folding the document with the brisk satisfaction of a man who has collected his fee. "The Wren debt is discharged, the estate in Dorset is released from claim, and Miss Cecily Wren becomes Duchess of Thornwall upon the marriage ceremony, to be conducted within the fortnight. The contract specifies 1 year of lawful residence at Thornwall House, after which, should no heir have been produced and should both parties consent, the arrangement may be dissolved by mutual agreement, with a settlement of £300 paid to the lady and the title of Dowager Duchess retained in name only. The lady is 24, in good health, and in full possession of the relevant facts." His Grace said nothing for a moment. He was looking at the fire the way he always looked at fires, like a man who expected them to do something useful or put themselves out. "She is a contract, nothing more," he said at last, addressing not Mr. Norris but me, as if I required confirmation of this. "She will have her rooms, her allowance, and her year. She will not be troubled, and she will not trouble me. See to it, Hewson." "Yes, Your Grace," I said, and poured the brandy. I was wrong to think nothing of it. She arrived on the 14th of March, which was a Tuesday, which matters only because the cook always burned the kedgeree on Tuesdays and the whole ground floor smelled of it, and that is not the way you want a house to smell when its new mistress sets her foot inside for the first time. I was at the door before the carriage wheels stopped. The footman behind me was struggling with his white gloves. Mrs. Hatch, the housekeeper, stood to my left with her hands folded so tightly I could see the white of her knuckles. Behind her, arranged in the vestibule with the uncertain posture of staff who have not had a mistress to serve for 17 years, and are not entirely certain what to do with one, were 7 of the household's indoor servants. The carriage door opened. She stepped out, not waited to be handed down, stepped out, one hand on the door frame, one foot finding the cobble, and I had my first look at the woman who had just become the Duchess of Thornwall. She was not what I expected. In my experience, the women produced by family solicitors for the purpose of inconvenient marriages fell into one of 2 types: the weeping kind, who arrived red-eyed and crumpled, damp with the effort of having cried all the way from wherever they had come from, and the rigid kind, who arrived armored in pride they could not quite afford, who held their chins at a precise angle and looked at nothing directly in case looking at it meant acknowledging it. Miss Cecily Wren was neither. She was perhaps 24, slight, with dark hair pulled back in a style that was neat rather than fashionable, and a gray wool traveling dress that had been mended at the left cuff, so precisely you would only see it if you were looking, which I was, because looking is my profession. Her face was calm, not the calm of a woman suppressing tears, and not the calm of a woman suppressing fury. The calm of a woman who had already decided, somewhere in the hired carriage between Dorset and London, that she would not spend this year flinching. It was the particular calm of someone who has taken stock of their situation honestly and found, beneath the difficulty of it, something they could stand on. It was, though I did not have words for it that morning, the calm of a person who knows who they are regardless of what room they are standing in. She looked at the house first. A long, measured look taking in the Portland stone frontage, the two Thornwall eagles carved above the second-floor windows, the arrangement of the staff in the vestibule behind me. Then she looked at me. "You are the Duke's man," she said, not a question. "Hewson, your Grace. His Grace's valet and head of household in Mr. Fitch's absence." Mr. Fitch, the butler, had been in his sister's care in Devon for 3 months with a difficulty of the lungs, and was not expected back until May. I had been managing the house in his stead, which I mention not to draw attention to myself, but because it is one reason I was, perhaps, more present in the house's daily business than a valet ordinarily would be, and therefore better placed to observe what followed. "Welcome to Thornwall House." She looked at the house again, briefly, the way a person looks at a thing they are trying to commit to memory rather than a thing they are admiring. Then she said, "Is there kedgeree? I have not eaten since yesterday morning, and I find I do not much care what it is so long as it is warm." Behind me I heard Mrs. Hatch breathe out, very slightly, with relief. It was the right thing to say. Not grateful in a way that embarrassed anyone, not demanding in a way that put anyone on the back foot, just honest, and directed at a real problem. You would be surprised how many people cannot manage that in the first 5 minutes of meeting a new house and all the people who keep it running. "The kitchen will have something hot within the quarter hour," I said, "if you will follow me." She followed me into Thornwall House with her one trunk and her composed face and her mended cuff, and I thought, this one will not last a year. The house is too cold, and the Duke is too absent, and £300, however it has been framed to her, is not enough to stay warm on. I was wrong about that, too. The Duke did not come down to meet her. This was not rudeness, or rather it was rudeness, but it was also the plainest possible message. He had signed the contract, he would honor the contract, and the contract did not require him to stand at the foot of his own staircase in the middle of a Tuesday. The marriage ceremony itself had been conducted the previous week at the parish church nearest Thornwall, a brief legal event attended by His Grace, 2 witnesses, Mr. Norris, and I was told the lady herself, though I had not been present. I had ironed the coat. That was my part. Mrs. Hatch had attended as a witness and reported that the lady had been composed throughout, had spoken her responses clearly, and had not cried. I showed her to the rooms that had been prepared on the second floor. A bedroom, a sitting room, a small dressing room. Not the Duchess's suite, which had been shut since the previous Duchess of Thornwall had died 17 years before, and which no one opened for any reason because the Duke preferred it that way. These rooms were east-facing and pleasant, recently recurtained in a sage green that was not fashionable but was not grim, with a fire already laid and a writing desk by the window that looked over the kitchen garden, and beyond it, the chestnut avenue. The chestnuts were bare still, it being March, and the avenue had the dignified emptiness of a thing waiting for its season. She stood at the window for a moment and looked at the chestnuts. "They'll be very fine in autumn," she said, not to me, to herself, or to no one. "They will, Your Grace," I said. She turned from the window, and for just a moment I saw something cross her face that was not quite sadness and not quite hope, but was made of the same materials as both. The look of a person who has just imagined a thing they were not sure they would be here to see, and found that they minded. "You do not have to call me that," she said. "I'm afraid I do," I said. "It is what you are." She looked at me steadily for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved just slightly in a way that was not quite a smile but was not its opposite either. "Very well," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Hewson." I withdrew. I informed the cook about the kedgeree situation. I went upstairs and pressed the Duke's evening coat and said nothing to anyone about anything. That was the beginning of it. The pattern of Thornwall House in those early weeks was simple. The Duke on the ground floor and in his study, the Duchess on the second floor and in her sitting room, and a house full of staff moving carefully between them, which was not a new arrangement. The Duke had lived alone for years, and the household had learned the particular rhythms of his solitude, the places he moved through, the hours he kept, the things he did not want disturbed. She settled into the house around his pattern, neither encroaching on it nor retreating from it, and the result was a kind of careful coexistence that, from the outside, probably looked like 2 people who barely knew each other were pretending to be married, which was exactly what they were. Or what they had intended to be. The first crack appeared at the end of the second week. I was passing the library door at 9:30 in the morning when I heard voices inside. One was the Duke's, measured, clipped, with the particular edge of a man who has said something he considers self-evident and is surprised to find it requires elaboration. The other was hers. I did not stop. I continued to the end of the hall, collected the morning's correspondence from the hall table, and then came back more slowly, because 19 years of service does not make a man incurious, only better at pretending. "This is the library," the Duke was saying, in the tone he used for facts that required no further discussion. "I can see that," she said pleasantly. "I was hoping to borrow a book." A pause. I imagined him looking at her. "The books are not borrowed, they are resident." Another pause, shorter. "I see. Then I will read one here and put it back when I am done." I could hear, in the silence that followed, the Duke working out whether this required him to object. The library had not been used for reading in 6 years, not since his mother had died, and the books were indeed resident and going nowhere. He had himself not opened a book in the library since 1857, preferring his study for correspondence and the newspapers, and there was therefore no practical reason to object to her reading there, only the architectural one that it was his house, and the library was in it, and he had not been consulted. "As you like," he said, which was the most ungracious version of assent possible and was nonetheless assent. I moved away from the door before he could open it. That evening at the port, he did not mention it. But the next morning she was in the library again at the same hour, and I noticed that his path from the breakfast room to the estate office, a route I knew as well as I knew my own face, had acquired a new appendix, an additional section through the east corridor, past the library door, which was not on the way to anything he was normally on his way to. He passed it and did not go in. He went to the estate office. He came back 2 hours later and passed it again. He did not go in. She was still in there. I knew, because I had been past the door myself on legitimate errands and heard pages turning. By the end of the 3rd week, she had arranged herself into the house with the quiet efficiency of water finding the shape of a vessel. She was not invisible. The staff knew she was there, felt it in the way the mornings ran more smoothly, the way the kitchen was consulted about menus rather than issued commands, the way Mrs. Hatch's shoulders had come down 1.5 inches from where they had been when the hired carriage pulled up. But she was not obtrusive. She did not assert herself in ways that disrupted the household's existing order. She simply improved things quietly and did not take credit for the improvements, and the improvements happened anyway. The kitchen, for instance. Thornwall's kitchen had operated under his Grace's standing order of plain food plainly presented, which had been the instruction his mother gave when she was well, and which had gone unchanged after she was no longer there to change it. The result was a kitchen that produced acceptable, joyless meals for a man who ate because he needed to, not because he was interested in the subject. She had a conversation with the cook, not an instruction, a conversation, asking what the cook had enjoyed making before coming to Thornwall, what the cook's own strengths were, and within a week the dinners were not unrecognizably different but were noticeably better, and the kitchen ran with the slightly more energized quality of a place that has been reminded of its own capabilities. The Duke ate everything put in front of him and said nothing about any of it, which was, in the language of Thornwall House, high praise. Once, memorably, I found her in the stable yard in conversation with Briggs, the head groom, about the gray mare. The mare was a large, capable animal who had thrown the Duke the previous autumn during what had apparently been a stone-startled shy in the near pasture. He had come off badly, though not seriously, and had declared the animal possessed and ordered her to be sold. Briggs had not sold her on the grounds that he did not believe in her possession, but the matter had been at a standstill since, the mare sitting in her box and becoming increasingly restless, and the Duke not going near her. She had been in the stable yard. I do not know how she had come to be there. She seemed to have a way of appearing in places where things needed attending to, and she and Briggs were deep in the mare's temperament. "She's not possessed," I heard her say to Briggs, who was nodding with the relieved expression of a man who has waited a long time for someone to say the obvious. "She's bored and she's testing you. Walk her on the long rein for a week. Give her something to think about that isn't the walls of her box." "His Grace says she's to be sold," Briggs said, though his tone made clear that he was presenting this as an obstacle rather than a settled fact. "His Grace's decision and the mare's character are 2 separate matters," she said pleasantly. "If the mare's character improves, His Grace may find his decision changes of its own accord." Briggs looked at her, then he laughed, caught himself, stopped, began again, and laughed properly. "Right you are," he said. She did not look up as I crossed the yard, but she was aware of me. She was always aware of who occupied a space with her, not with suspicion, not with the anxious watchfulness of someone who has learned that people are dangerous, but with the attention of someone who has learned to take note of the exits and the presences in a room, which is a different thing. I mentioned none of this to the Duke. My place was the coat and the port and the letters and the schedule, and that was quite enough without adding commentary on his wife's management of the stable yard. But I watched. The first dinner together happened at the end of the first month, not because either of them had wished for it, but because Mr. Norris sent a letter inquiring, in the oblique language of his profession, whether the terms of the contract were being honored in spirit as well as letter. His Grace read the letter twice, which was once more than he usually read correspondence he found irritating. He set it down. He drank his coffee. He said, without looking up from the letter, "Tell the kitchen we will dine together this evening, 7 o'clock. "Yes, Your Grace," I said. He picked up the letter again. "And tell—" he stopped. He had not, I realized, used her name since she arrived, not once. He had referred to her in my hearing as the Duchess on 2 occasions, and she on 4, and had otherwise avoided the necessity of referencing her at all, which in a house the size of Thornwall was a considerable organizational achievement. "Tell the Duchess," he said, as if the title were a word he was simply selecting from a list rather than arriving at after consideration of the alternatives. "That dinner is at 7. "Yes, Your Grace." I told her. She was in the library, which she had in 4 weeks effectively claimed as her space between the hours of 9 and 5, and she received the information with the same composure she received everything else. "Thank you, Mr. Hewson," she said. "I will be there." She was there before he was. She was seated at the far end of the table in a dark blue dinner dress that was several years behind the fashion but was well made and well kept, and she was sitting with the particular stillness of a person who is not nervous but is very much paying attention to everything, which I had come to recognize as her mode. Not nervous, attentive. He arrived 3 minutes later, took in her presence at the far end of the table with the expression of a man who has arranged for a thing to happen and is now slightly surprised to find it has happened, and sat at the near end. I set the soup. For the first quarter of an hour, the only sounds were the silver against the china, and the fire settling in the grate. Not an uncomfortable silence, precisely. They were 2 people who had agreed, each independently, not to begin badly, and silence was one way to honor that agreement. But it was a full silence. It had weight. There were things in it that neither of them was yet prepared to say. Then she said, quite calmly, "I am told you believe the gray mare to be possessed." He looked up. Whatever he had expected her to say, it was not that. I saw the exact moment he decided to answer honestly rather than formally, which was the same moment the dinner became something other than an obligation. "She threw me," he said. "She did. Briggs tells me it was a stone in the near pasture. She shied at the sound and you came off. She was frightened, he says." A pause. "He also says she stood over you for 20 minutes until he arrived." The Duke was quiet for a moment. "Briggs said that." "He did. He was quite specific about the 20 minutes. He also said—" She paused, choosing, it seemed, between several things she might say. "He said that in 30 years of working with horses he has never seen a mare do that for a man she did not trust. Usually they run." The Duke looked at his plate. A long look, the kind that is not seeing the plate but is seeing something else, something that has just been placed differently in his understanding of events. "She stood over me," he said. "For 20 minutes," she said, "until Briggs arrived." He said she was still, and she was trembling both. Another silence, but it was a different kind of silence from the ones before it. Not empty. Full of something small and warm that had not been there before, the way a coal catches, not a blaze, just the beginning of light and heat, quiet, contained enough. "I had not known that," the Duke said. "No," she said, "I imagine not." They were quiet through the rest of the soup course. But by the first remove, he had moved his chair from his end of the table to the middle of it, where the candlelight reached better, and he had asked her a question, where in Dorset exactly and how large had the estate been. And she had told him. A village called Wren's Crossing, which had been her family's name before it was the villages, and was now more the villages than the families, which told him plainly the entire story of the Wren estate in one sentence. Not apology, not bitterness. simply the plain statement of a fact about the world. And then she moved on from it, and the moving on was the thing, the way you move on from a country you have left and do not intend to be defined by. She spoke about Dorset the way someone speaks of a place they have loved honestly, including its failures. The light in the mornings on the coast, the particular difficulty of the soil in the western fields, the house, which had been fine before the debts began, and the village, which had been kind. She did not make it sentimental, and she did not make it small, and she did not ask him to feel sorry for her about any of it, which, I thought, standing at the sideboard with the claret, was exactly the right way to tell it. He listened. I had seen him listen to his estate manager and his solicitor and his tenants in their annual meetings, and the listening was always attentive and efficient. He extracted what was relevant and filed it. This was not that. He was listening the way a person listens when they want to know not only what is said, but who is saying it. The house, he said, in Wren's Crossing, what was it like? She considered, smaller than this, better proportioned. The corner of her mouth moved. There were roses along the south wall in June that had been there since my grandmother's time. They outlasted everything else. What became of them? She looked at her wine for a moment. They are still there, I should think. The house was sold, not torn down. Someone else's south wall now. She looked up. I was glad of the roses at the end. It seemed important that they would continue. He looked at her steadily. It was the kind of look that has stopped being the polite attention of a host and has become the uncalculated attention of a man who has found himself genuinely interested, which is a different thing entirely. Yes, he said, I can see that it would. The dinner ended. He rose and said formally that it had been pleasant, which was not a word he normally used for anything. And she said, equally formally, that it had been very pleasant indeed, and I believed them both. I extinguished the downstairs lamps and went upstairs and thought, not for the first time that evening, about what I had seen across that dinner table. It was the first real conversation the Duke of Cornwall had had with another human being in, as far as I could calculate, approximately 3 years. The last one I could recall of any substance had been with his mother before she died. He had not forgotten how to do it. That was the thing. He had only needed someone he could do it with. The dinners continued. Not every evening. Some evenings he ate in the study. Some evenings she had a tray sent up, but twice a week at least. And then 3 times, and then 4, and I adjusted the settings accordingly and said nothing. What I observed over those weeks was this. He began to find reasons to pass the library. The routes he took through the house shifted incrementally, the way a river shifts over time, always arriving at the same place. He would go from the study to the estate office by the east corridor. He would return from the estate office by the east corridor. He would, sometimes, go from the estate office to the study by the east corridor, past the library door, and then turn around and go back to the estate office because he had forgotten something. He had not forgotten anything. He never forgot things. She, for her part, did not look up when he passed, which I had come to understand was not indifference but a form of courtesy, the courtesy of not catching a man in something he had not yet admitted to himself. She read widely and quickly. She had a particular interest in agricultural texts, which she read with the focused attention of someone who grew up watching a practical problem nobody had solved. She made notes in a small leather journal that she kept in her left-hand skirt pocket, which was not fashionable but was sensible. I had the opportunity once. I mention this without apology, as it happened in the sitting room where I was assisting with a window that would not close, and she was on the other side of the room making no secret of what she was writing. To see that her notes were detailed and cross-referenced, with small, careful diagrams and observations that were as clear as any professional report. She was, I understood gradually, very intelligent. Not in the showy way of people who want you to know they are intelligent, in the quiet, workmanlike way of someone who uses intelligence as a tool and does not think of it as an ornament. One morning, 5 weeks after her arrival, I came into the study to find His Grace at his desk with an agricultural report from the Dorset Land Commission spread in front of him, which was not unusual. And beside it, unmistakably in the neat small hand I had by now recognized, 3 pages of notes on drainage systems in clay-heavy soil. He heard me enter. He did not move the papers. "The Duchess has an opinion about the South Field," he said. "Has she, Your Grace?" "She has 3 pages of opinions about the South Field. She appears to have studied it in some detail." He paused. The South Field has been returning poor yields for 11 years. He turned one of the pages toward me. She thinks it is the drainage. She has sketched an alternative channel and estimated the approximate cost in the margin. The sketch was precise. She had labeled everything, drawn it to a rough scale, and added a note at the bottom that said, "I recognize this is not my place to suggest, but the solution seems clear and I could not help writing it down." She has been careful to say it is not her place, I noted. Yes, he said, she has. He looked at the papers for a moment. How does she know about drainage? I believe her family's estate had difficulties, I said. I know that, he said, slightly impatiently. I am asking how she knows the solution. I thought about what she had said in the library and in the stable yard and over dinner. I think, I said carefully, that she is someone who looks at problems until she understands them. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the sketch again. The sketch is correct, he said. It is, in fact, the solution I should have arrived at years ago if I had looked at the data properly. He set the page down. She has been very quiet. She has, Your Grace. I would not have expected someone in her. He stopped, reconsidered. I would not have expected her to be so. He stopped again. I waited. He looked at the fire. Then, she is not what I expected, he said, which was, for a man who spoke almost exclusively in complete sentences, a remarkably incomplete one. No, Your Grace, I said, I don't believe she is. The South Field drainage was altered in the spring. His Grace gave the order himself, based, he told the estate manager, on a careful review of the Land Commission report. He did not mention the 3 pages of notes in the neat small hand. But when the estate manager had gone, he went to the library, and I heard him from the hallway where I was, I assure you, engaged in entirely legitimate business, say her name. Say it for the first time, fully. Not the Duchess, but Cecily. He said it carefully, as if he had rehearsed the saying of it and found that rehearsal had not adequately prepared him. Cecily, the drainage order has been given. A pause, pages turning, or perhaps the soft close of a book. I am glad, she said. The yield should improve by next summer. I expect so. A longer pause. The notes you left were clear. And correct. Another pause. I should have looked at the South Field sooner. 11 years is I should have looked sooner. She was quiet for a moment. You had other demands on your time, she said. Not condescension, the plain acknowledgement of a real fact, which is a thing you can say to someone without making them feel small if you say it the right way. I had other demands, he agreed. And there was something in his voice that was not simply agreement, the tone of a man who had just looked at a gap between what he had been attending to and what he had been letting slide, and found the gap wider than he'd thought, and was not yet certain what to do about it. He left the library shortly after. He was quiet at dinner. But he looked at her when she was not looking at him and looked away when she turned, and I set the claret at his elbow and thought, here it is. Here it comes. The thing I did not expect when Mr. Norris laid the contract on the desk and His Grace said she was nothing more than it. What came next came slowly, which was right. There was a careful, dignified quality to everything she did that would have been violated by anything hurried or heavy, and he had enough instinct left, or enough learned attention, to match his pace to hers. He began to stay at dinner past the point where he would previously have excused himself. He began to ask her things. About the books she was reading, about the kitchen garden, which she had reorganized with the head gardener's input into something productive after years of purely ornamental function. He asked about Dorset again, in more detail, the specific crops, the specific terrain, the names of things. He asked about her childhood in the way a person asks when they are actually building a picture rather than making conversation. She answered him directly and asked him things in return. About the estate's eastern boundary dispute, about the house and its history, and once, carefully, about his mother. The portrait hung in the morning room, the previous Duchess of Thornwall, painted in her middle years, a handsome woman with an expression of amused intelligence. She had died of a fever when the Duke was 21, and her rooms had been sealed on the 3rd floor, and the house had never quite recovered from her, which was a thing I knew from years of observation and had never had occasion to say aloud. She looked at the portrait one morning. I was passing through with some letters, and then she asked me quietly who it was. The late Duchess, I said, His Grace's mother. She looked at the portrait for another moment. She said nothing, but at dinner that evening, in a pause in the conversation, she said, She has a kind face in the portrait." He looked up. "The late Duchess," she said. "In the morning room, I saw her this morning. She has a very kind face." He was still for a moment. He looked at the fire. "Then she was," he said. "Very kind." He said nothing more, and she did not press it, did not reach for the next question, did not offer the sympathy that would have required him to acknowledge how much he minded. She simply said, "I thought so," and let it rest there, which was exactly the right thing to do with a wound that is not yet yours to tend. I watched him across the table in the moment after she said it. The careful outer surface of the Duke of Thornwall shifted, slightly, like ice at the first suggestion of March. A small shift, visible only to someone who had been watching for 19 years. But it was a shift. It was already too late, I thought. He did not know it yet. But it was already too late for the terms of the contract to mean what they had meant when he signed them. She knew. I am certain of that, looking back. She had known or suspected for some weeks, perhaps from the moment he began walking the east corridor unnecessarily, perhaps from the first time she looked up and found him in the library doorway looking at her and looking away. She was not a foolish woman, and a foolish woman would have had to be very foolish indeed not to notice what I was noticing. And it frightened her. I saw that too. Not in anything she said nothing about it, but in the small calibrations of her manner. The way she sometimes, when a dinner had run long and grown easy, pulled back slightly, not rudely, not obviously, but with the small caution of a woman reminding herself where the edge of a thing was. She had come to Thornwall for a year, and she had been honest with herself about the year, and the year had an end, and the end was the thing she had built her future on. £300 and a title she could carry out of the house like a clean handkerchief. Somewhere she could be entirely herself without the weight of obligation or gratitude, or the particular loneliness of a kindness that is also a contract. She was being careful with him. She was warm, she was real, she was entirely herself, and she was being careful, and the care was self-protection, and I respected it. What I did not expect was the evening it slipped. It was not dramatic, no moonlight and no revelation. What there was, a dinner that had run past 10 o'clock, a fire burning lower, both of them on the same side of a conversation for the first time in weeks. He had been talking about the boundary dispute, and she had said something sharp about the relevant case law, which she had looked up because she looked everything up, and he had stopped mid-sentence. "You looked up the case law," he said. "I found it interesting," she said. "That is the most obscure corner of English property law," he said. "It is actively unpleasant to read." "It is," she agreed with composure, "thoroughly unpleasant. But the relevant precedent is in the 1803 ruling, and not in the 1812 one. And if you cite the 1812 ruling in your next letter to Caldecott's solicitors, you will simply be giving them an argument to dismiss." He stared at her for a moment, and then he laughed. He laughed before he could stop himself, unplanned, genuine, the kind of laugh that escapes because the thing that caused it is too surprising to process first. It was not like any of the 4 or 5 correctly deployed laughs I had witnessed in 19 years of service. It was a real one. She looked at him when it happened with an expression I recognized with a small lurch, because it was the same thing he had been doing to her for weeks. Looking, registering, looking away before the look could be named. She turned her face toward the window. "You looked that up," he said, when he had recovered himself. "I did," she said. "I do that." "Why, in God's name, would you spend an afternoon reading 18th century property law cases?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because it seemed like a problem with a solution," she said, "and I find I cannot leave those alone." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "No," he said, "I don't imagine you can." He said it with a warmth that was not entirely within his usual range, and she heard it, and the corner of her mouth moved the way it moved when something was not quite a smile and was not its opposite. They were not saying something to each other. They had been not saying it for 2 months. The not saying had acquired its own weight and presence by now. The weight of something that takes up space in a room even when it has no name. I withdrew at 10:30. Mrs. Hatch informed me the next morning that the lamps in the dining room had not been extinguished until nearly midnight. They had continued talking after I left, which was, in the language of Thornwall House, extraordinary. I said, "Thank you, Mrs. Hatch," and went to press the morning coat, and thought about what it means when 2 people who have agreed to a temporary arrangement start staying up until midnight talking about property law. It means the arrangement is becoming something else. May arrived. The chestnuts in the avenue put out their leaves, which were, as she had predicted in March, very fine, a deep, full green against the pale stone of the east wing. His Grace's afternoon schedule shifted almost imperceptibly in the direction of the house and the garden. The estate business was conducted in the mornings with its usual brisk efficiency. The afternoons, previously devoted to solitary rides or correspondence, sometimes to nothing in particular, a peculiarly solitary version of rest, began to include other things. He walked to the kitchen garden, ostensibly to speak with the head gardener, increasingly because she was there between 2 and 4 o'clock, and the walk required him to pass through the garden gate. He stopped by the library at 4 o'clock, which was when she generally returned from the garden, so that by 4:15 they were frequently in the same room, talking, which looked from the outside like accident and was not. I know it was not because I watched him arrange it, watched him, with the careful deliberateness of a man who does not do spontaneity, and who has decided that spontaneity must therefore be engineered, calculate the precise sequence of movements that would bring him to the library at 4 o'clock when she returned from the garden. He moved his afternoon schedule around a woman who read agricultural texts and kept notes in a leather journal, and he told himself it was about the kitchen garden and the boundary dispute and the estate, and this was not precisely a lie, but it was not precisely the truth either. She, for her part, was not fooled. She arrived at the library at 4 and found him there and did not look surprised, because she was not, and talked with him for an hour about the boundary dispute and the drainage and the kitchen garden and, one afternoon near the end of May, the question of what she would do when the year was done. I should not have heard this. I was passing the door on legitimate business, and I slowed, as I had learned to do, which I am not proud of and am not sorry for. £300, she was saying in the tone of someone working a problem aloud. I have been thinking about a market garden outside York, a small one. I have read about it. The soil is good and the market is reliable and the present owner is willing to sell at a reasonable figure. A silence. You have planned this, he said. His voice was carefully even and the care was the tell. I have thought about it, she said with equal care. It is sensible to think about one's future. Yes, he said, it is sensible. Silence. Cecily, he said. She waited. The year is not yet half done, he said. No, she said, it is not. He did not say what he had been about to say. She did not fill the silence for him. The silence stayed between them, and it was a different kind of silence than the ones before it, not empty, but full of the thing neither of them had yet found a way to say, which had been building for weeks and was beginning to be rather heavy. I continued on my errand with more attention to my feet than was technically required. That evening at dinner they talked about other things, and they talked easily, as they always did now, but there was something that had shifted and not quite settled. A piece of furniture moved an inch. The room the same room, but the arrangement different, and you had to find your way through it differently. He was, I think, beginning to understand what he had done. He had signed a contract. He had told his valet in the plainest possible language that she was nothing beyond it. He had built a house around that certainty, and the house had been, for all its emptiness, a house he knew how to live in. And now the year was less than half done and she was planning a market garden in York, which meant she was still inside the contract, still honoring the terms, and he was the one who had moved. He had moved, and she had stayed still, which was, in its way, the most unnerving possible arrangement. He had never, in 19 years, moved toward anything he had not been certain of. He was the Duke of Thornwall. He was not built for uncertainty. And yet here it was, and it was in the house he had built, and it had his own signature on it, and he had nobody to blame for it but himself and perhaps Mr. Norris. He did not show it. He never showed anything he did not intend to show. But I had 19 years, and I saw. June, the gray mare walked on the long rein for the requisite weeks, had settled magnificently. Briggs reported to the Duke, with the careful diplomacy of a man who knows he is delivering news his employer might not like, that the animal had transformed. She was forward, she was willing, she was trustworthy on every surface. She needed a rider. His Grace went to the stable yard one morning when the house was quiet. I watched from the window. He stood beside the mare's box for a long time, 5 minutes perhaps, and then he opened it and went in, and I watched him stand beside the mare's head with his hand on her nose, which was something the Duke of Thornwall had not done with a horse he had decided was against him. They were still for a long time. The mare did not move except to turn her head into his hand. The following week he rode her. She watched from the kitchen garden gate, which she happened to be passing at that moment, which was, I suspect, not entirely accidental on her part. She did not wave. She simply watched, with the steady attention she gave to everything she was interested in. He brought the mare past the gate on the return. The mare was walking easily, not a thing wrong with her, and he looked at the gate and he looked at her and he said, without dismounting, "You were right about the long rein." "Briggs was right about it," she said. "I only repeated what he told me." He looked at her for a moment. Then he dismounted, which he had not planned. I could see from his expression that the dismounting was happening before he had decided to do it. And he led the mare through the gate into the kitchen garden and stood beside her in the May sunshine with the mare's reins over his arm, which was a peculiar thing to do. And he said, "What else have you been right about that you have not told me?" She considered, looking at the mare. "The east ditch by the paddock wants clearing. The apple espaliers on the south wall have been trained incorrectly for 3 seasons and want taking back to the main lateral before they fruit again." She looked at him. "And Mrs. Hatch has not had a full Saturday afternoon to herself in 14 years. Is that all?" "For today," she said, and the corner of her mouth moved. He stood in the kitchen garden for longer than any errand could account for, with the mare at his shoulder and the May light on the chestnut trees above the wall. She went back to her notes. She looked up once, briefly, and looked away again when she found him looking at her, and he looked at the chestnuts, and the mare put her nose against his shoulder. Mrs. Hatch began receiving Saturday afternoons from that week on. The east ditch was cleared by midsummer. The espaliers were retrained in July. She always put the library books back when she was done. I noticed this in June when I was dusting and found the shelves in better order than they had been when she arrived. The volumes she had borrowed each returned to its place. I had not noticed before her how rarely people do that. July, the year was more than half gone. I began to feel in the house a change in the quality of the air, a texture almost. That time takes on when something approaches, and nobody has yet found the language to address it. His Grace was more present in the house and more distracted simultaneously. He would stand at the study window and look at the kitchen garden not because it required his attention, but because she was sometimes there. He arrived at dinner early, which had never been his custom, and straightened things on the sideboard that did not need straightening. He was deciding something. Or rather, he was trying to admit something to himself that he had already decided weeks ago, which is not the same as deciding but feels like it from the inside. She, in turn, was more careful than ever, not cold, not distant, but with the particular alertness of a person who is approaching the edge of something and is making sure of their footing. She was warm and direct and entirely present at dinner, and she was also, I thought, beginning to prepare herself for a departure that she was not entirely certain she still wanted to make, which is an uncomfortable position for someone who has spent several months relying on the certainty of that departure as the foundation of her composure. The thing that broke the stalemate was not a dramatic confrontation in a candle-lit room. It was a letter from a solicitor in York. It arrived the second week of August, and it was addressed to her, and it concerned the market garden. I saw the letterhead on the hall table while she was removing her gloves. I did not read it, but I saw enough to know what it was, and I set it on the tray and brought it to her sitting room and left it there. She was at dinner that evening in her usual composure, but the composure was working. Over-maintained, slightly, the way a thing looks when something is pressing against it from the inside. He noticed, he always noticed now. "You have had news," he said, not a question. She set down her wine. "A letter from York," she said, "about the market garden I have been inquiring about." A pause. "They have had another inquiry. They would like a decision by September." September, the contract ran until March, 7 months remaining. He set down his glass. "You would leave early," he said. "I would need to consult Mr. Norris about the terms," she said carefully. "It may not be permissible." "It is permissible," he said, "if I consent." A pause, the fire shifted, the candles burned. "You would consent," she said. He looked at his glass. "I would not," he said. The silence that followed was the longest I had heard in that room, and I had been listening in that room, quietly and professionally, for 19 years. She was very still. He did not look up. "The contract," she began. "I am not speaking about the contract," he said. Silence. "James," she said. She used his Christian name, which she had never done before. I think it startled both of them. He looked up. He looked at her with the look that had been building since March, since the gray mare and the South Field and the case law and 100 evenings of dinner, where neither of them had said the thing they were not saying. And it was not a complicated look. It was the look of a man who has known precisely what he feels for some months, and has been waiting, with diminishing patience, for a way to say it that did not violate everything he had told her this arrangement was. "I do not want you to go to York," he said. She was still. "I am aware," he said with a precision that cost him something, "that I told you that I said the terms of the contract were the terms of the thing that I said before you came to this house, that you were nothing more than what the document required. I said it plainly, and I said it clearly, and I said it, I think, because it was the easiest way to establish that I expected nothing from you that was not specified in the pages." He stopped. He looked at the table. "I was wrong about what this would be." She said nothing. "I was wrong about what it would be," he said again, "and I should have told you sooner. I did not know how to tell you without asking you to change the terms of an arrangement you had agreed to on a particular understanding, which seemed to me." He stopped. He chose the next words carefully. "I did not want to ask you to stay on terms that resembled an obligation. You came here on a clear agreement. I signed it. I intend to honor it. What I am—" Another pause. "What I am asking is separate from the contract." She looked at him. "What are you asking?" "I am asking you to stay," he said. "Not on the contract's terms, on different terms." He looked at her directly, with the steady clarity of a man who has run out of evasions. "On whatever terms you would choose if you were willing to choose them. If you would stay." She looked at the fire, she looked at him, she looked at her hands. "You are not," she began. "I am not mistaken," he said quietly, answering what she had not finished saying. "I am not. This is not gratitude, and it is not the management of a household arrangement, and it is not an impulse of the moment. It is something I have known since May and have been trying to find a correct way to say, and I have not found a better way than this, which is plain." He paused. "I am not wrong about what is between us." She was very still. "James," she said again, and this time the name had something different in it. Not the startlement of the first use, but the weight of a name said by someone who is, for the first time, allowing herself to say it and mean it. "I did not come here expecting this," she said. "I know. I came here because it was the only way forward, and I had agreed to it honestly. And I told myself very clearly that I would honor the year and take my £300 and go somewhere. And it would be clean, and cleanness was what I could afford." "I know that too," he said. "I know it. I have watched you be careful about it for 4 months. A pause. "I have watched you be careful with me, and I understand why, and I am not asking you to abandon your care. I am asking you to consider that what is between us," he stopped, "that the care may no longer be serving its original purpose." She looked at him for a long moment. The fire had settled. The candles had burned lower. Outside, the August night was still. "I have been trying," she said slowly, "to remain inside the terms of the thing I agreed to." She looked at the fire. "I have been quite determined about it." "I know," he said. "Because the terms were clear and honorable, and they were what I had agreed to, and I did not think it was fair to." She stopped. She breathed. "I thought, if I remained inside the terms, I would not owe anyone anything at the end of it, and I would go to York and it would be mine." "Yes," he said. "But I find," she said, and she said it very quietly, looking at the table, "that the terms have become, that remaining inside them has become—" She looked up at him. "That I would not go to York," she said. "If I am honest, I would not. I would stay here and look at the chestnuts in October and argue about property law with you over dinner," and she stopped. The corner of her mouth moved, and then the whole of it moved, and it was not quite a smile, but the real thing, which I had seen rarely and which changed her face entirely. "I would be glad of it," she said. He breathed very carefully, in the way of a man who has been not breathing properly for some time, and has only just noticed. "Cecily," he said. She looked at him. "Would you stay?" he said, only that. She looked at him for a long moment, with the same expression I had seen in the stable yard when he brought the mare past the gate. The expression of someone who has been watching something from a careful distance, and has now decided, on clear and considered evidence, that the distance is no longer necessary. Yes, she said. He stood. He came from his end of the table to her end, to her chair, and he held out his hand, not with the formal extension of a contract transaction, but with the particular care of a man who is very certain of what he is doing, and is being careful with it precisely because it is certain. She took his hand. I withdrew. I went to the servants' hall and told Mrs. Hatch that the dining room lamps would be burning late tonight, and there was no need to wait up. She looked at me, I looked at her. We did not say anything because we are both professionals. I went upstairs and thought about what I had seen, which was the Duke of Thornwall in his dining room, holding the hand of the woman he had told me in September was nothing more than a contract, with an expression on his face that was nothing like the expressions I had seen there in 19 years of daily proximity. He looked, I thought, like a man who has put down something he had been carrying for a long time without knowing he was carrying it. The lamps burned until 2 o'clock in the morning. I found them both still at the table at midnight when I came to check the fires, both of them, talking in the unguarded, easy manner of people who have given themselves permission to stop being careful, who have decided to simply be what they are, and I withdrew without disturbing them, and felt in doing so that particular satisfaction which is not pleasure exactly, but is its own distinct thing, the satisfaction of watching something work out the way it ought to. The following morning, His Grace asked me to bring him the contract. It was in the third drawer of the study desk, in a black leather folio with the Thornwall seal. I brought it to the desk and stepped back. He sat with it for a moment, looking at the cover. Then he opened it and read through it with care, the way he read everything he was reading properly, not skimming, but reading each clause. The year, the £300, the dissolution by mutual agreement, the title retained in name only. He read it all. Then he looked up at me. "Hewson," he said. "Your Grace." He looked at the contract for one more moment. He picked it up, both pages, the Thornwall seal and Mr. Norris's signature, and the year and the £300 and the title in name only, and he held it over the candle on the desk. The paper caught. He held it until he could not and set the burning remainder in the fireplace grate. He watched it go. "There," he said. It was a very quiet word for the occasion. "Yes, Your Grace," I said. He looked at the fire for a moment. Then, "Ask Mrs. Hatch to open the Duchess's suite, the 3rd floor." He looked at me. "The rooms want airing, they have been shut too long." "They have, Your Grace," I said. "Send word to Mr. Norris. I'll want him here next week. There are documents to be drawn up." A pause. "Different documents, the whole estate, the whole title, the whole of it in her name properly." "Yes, Your Grace." He paused, he looked at the empty grate. "And tell her, ask the Duchess whether she would like to see the suite. Tell her I would be glad to show it to her, if she is willing." I found her in the library, where I generally found her at that hour, small leather journal, a book from the history shelf, the quiet composure that was beginning to look, to my experienced eye, less like self-protection and more simply like contentment. I told her His Grace wished to know if she would care to see the Duchess's suite, which had been opened this morning. She looked at me, a long, measuring look. "The suite has been shut for 17 years, she said. "It has, Your Grace." She was quiet for a moment, holding the small journal. She looked at it. Then she set it on the table carefully and stood. "I would be very glad to see it," she said. I brought her to him. He was at the top of the 3rd floor stair, waiting, which was something the Duke of Thornwall had not done for anyone at a staircase in his adult life. But he was there. And when she reached the landing, he offered her his arm, not in the formal style of an escort, but in the way you offer your arm to someone you intend to walk somewhere beside. And she took it, and they walked together into the rooms that had been sealed for 17 years. The rooms were large and south-facing, with tall windows that Mrs. Hatch had opened to the August morning. The air in them was clear. There were no traces of the long years of sealing, only the furniture in its Holland covers, the pale rectangles on the walls where pictures had hung, the fireplace clean and cold. A room waiting to be a room again. She looked around it carefully, the way she looked at things she intended to understand. "It is beautiful," she said. "The proportions are, it is a beautiful room." "It will want changes," he said, "to be yours. Whatever you want to change, change it." She turned and looked at him. The morning light from the south windows fell full on her face, and I noted, with the professional attention I gave to faces, that the composed containment she had worn since March was not gone but had changed its quality. It was composed now in the way that a thing is composed when it is complete in itself, not when it is protecting itself. "Not many changes," she said quietly. He smiled. He smiled before he could stop himself, without his usual brief, appropriately deployed version of the expression, and without appearing to want it back. It was the beginning of what I could only call the life, which is harder to describe than the story, because it is made of small things and ordinary things, and the particular warmth of days lived without the weight of provisional arrangements. What I observed over those months, the dinners that ran later every week, until 11 o'clock was the ordinary shape of an evening, and neither of them thought anything of it. The rides on the gray mare that became, by degrees, rides together. She rode well, though she had not had the opportunity for several years, and the mare approved of her completely, which I could have predicted. The boundary dispute, which was resolved in September by a letter she drafted, and he signed, ending 11 years of litigation in a fortnight by the simple expedient of citing the correct legal precedent, which is the 1803 ruling and not the 1812 one. The third-floor suite, which was opened and aired and altered in small, thoughtful ways through the autumn, a portrait she had chosen, a desk she had moved to the south window, the removal of a large and gloomy armoire that had dominated the bedroom and replaced it with a smaller piece from the east wing. Each alteration was discussed with him. Each one was decided together. The rooms, I thought, were becoming hers. And in becoming hers they were also becoming, somehow, his again, open to something that had been sealed with them when he shut the door 17 years before. I should tell you about the November letter from Norris confirming the new terms, which were not £300 and a title in name only but everything, the whole estate in trust, the whole title proper, the whole marriage binding not for a year but for the rest of both their lives. He read it at dinner and passed it to her without preamble, and she read it and set it beside her wine and was quiet for a moment. "You did not have to do this," she said. "The previous terms were not adequate," he said. "The previous terms were what we agreed to." "The previous terms," he said, "were the terms of a man who had decided something before he had the information to decide it properly. I had the information by April. I should have done this in April." He looked at her steadily. "It was owed. What I am offering now is what should have been offered at the beginning." She looked at the letter, she looked at him. "You are offering me the whole of it," she said. "Yes," he said, "if you will have it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she put out her hand across the table, and he took it, and held it in the plain, certain manner of a man who has made a decision and will not be moved from it. "I will have it," she said. "Good," he said. There was nothing more to say about it. There were, of course, things to say in the weeks that followed, the new documents to review, the alterations to the title, the conversation with Mr. Norris that His Grace conducted with brisk efficiency, as if the whole business were merely an administrative correction and not the most significant decision of his life. But those are not the moments I am trying to describe. The moment I am trying to describe is December, the Christmas that Thornwall House had not properly kept for 12 years. She found the records. She had a way of finding things in the household records that nobody else had looked at in years. She read them the way she read everything else, thoroughly, with attention to what was actually on the page. And she found, in the records from His Grace's mother's time, the account of Christmas at Thornwall as it had been before the household had stopped keeping it. The decorations, the staff arrangements, the gifts to the village children, the afternoon when the doors were opened and the people of the village were invited in for food and fire. She did not announce it. She simply organized it quietly in conversation with Mrs. Hatch and the cook, and the first His Grace knew of the open afternoon was when he came downstairs on Christmas Day and found the entry hall full. Not the sneering elite of his usual world, the village, farmers and their families, the blacksmith and his wife, the schoolmaster, children in their best clothes looking at the Thornwall Christmas decorations with the uncomplicated pleasure of people who are glad to be somewhere warm and who were given mince pies. He stood at the foot of the stair and looked at it. She appeared at his side. She had come from somewhere in the middle of it. He had not seen her arrive. She had simply been there, talking with someone, and now she was beside him. "The records showed it was done every Christmas until 1849, she said, not quite quietly enough to be a private remark and not quite loudly enough to be a public one. "I thought it was perhaps time." He looked at the hall. He looked at the faces. He was, I could see, entirely outside his usual territory. The Duke of Thornwall had spent 38 years making himself the most feared man in the county, and the people in his entry hall were not afraid of him, and he was not certain what to do in a room where nobody was afraid of him. But he did not leave. He stayed for 2 hours. He talked to the blacksmith about the drainage work, which the blacksmith had seen from the road and thought well executed. He talked to the schoolmaster about the new schoolroom roof, which wanted attention. He talked to 2 of the children, briefly, with the careful formality of a man who does not have much experience of children, but is not going to let that stop him. He ate a mince pie, standing, which was not his customary mode of eating. She moved through the room with the easy warmth of someone entirely at home among ordinary people, because she had always been in the years before Thornwall, and people were glad to see her, and told her things and laughed at things she said, and she laughed in return, and the room was warmer for all of it. At the end of the afternoon, he stood beside her at the door, and they thanked the last of the visitors together, and watched them go down the drive in the gray December light with their children and their good manners and their plain gladness. He stood in the doorway for a moment with his shoulder close to hers. "Next year," he said, "we will have more people. There are families in the North Village I have not spoken to in some time." She looked at him with an expression that was, I thought, mostly happiness, the unguarded sort. "That would be good," she said. "And the schoolroom roof," he said, "that wants doing in the spring." "It does," she agreed. "I should have done it before," he said. He was looking at the avenue, which was bare of leaves and full of the gray winter light, and his voice had the tone he had used in April about the South Field, the tone of a man who has started looking at things he had not been looking at, and is finding rather a lot of them. "There are several things I should have attended to that I have not attended to." "There are also many things," she said, "that you have attended to very well." He looked at her. "You are being kind." "I am being accurate," she said. "They are not the same thing, though they often feel like it." He stood in the doorway and looked at her and smiled, and did not bother to contain it. It is February now, 11 months after she arrived in a hired carriage with 1 trunk and no maid. I am writing this account because I am a man who has watched things for 19 years and knows that some things want recording, not because anyone will read it, but because the act of putting them down in careful order is a way of understanding them. What I understand, having put it all down, the Duke of Thornwall is not a man who changes. He is a man who is always what he is now. The man in the kitchen garden holding the mare's reins over his arm, the man at the top of the 3rd-floor stair with his arm extended, the man who burned the contract in the fireplace grate without ceremony and replaced it with something worth keeping. He was always that man. He had simply, until March of last year, not been given the particular circumstances that would require it. She gave him the circumstances, not by trying to. By being herself, which is the most demanding thing one person can do in a room with another. Simply be, entirely and without apology, exactly what they are. And by having the patience to do it steadily, day after day, without requiring him to respond to it before he was ready. And he responded. He responded with the care of a man who does things deliberately and means them when he does, and who has discovered that being deliberate about a thing does not preclude being glad of it. Thornwall House is warmer now, not in the structural sense, the same drafts visit the same corridors, but in the sense that matters, the sense that a house acquires when it is genuinely occupied by people who intend to stay in it and to make something of it together. The fires are lit earlier. The breakfast room is used, the 3rd floor is open, the library is read in and returned to, the kitchen makes things that are worth eating. The gray mare is ridden daily, alternately by each of them, and is apparently the most contented animal in the county. The South Field returned its best yield in a decade. The chestnuts in the avenue are bare again now, but I have seen them in full leaf, and they were, as she said in March with her face to the window and her 1 trunk still in the hall, very fine indeed. I am Hewson, valet to the Duke of Thornwall. I have been in this household for 19 years. In that time, I have witnessed precisely 1 document signed in this study that I believed would amount to nothing, and I was wrong about it more completely than I have been wrong about any other thing in my professional life. The contract was a machine, as I said, A machine for producing an orderly discharge of debt and a year of required cohabitation and a clean exit on both sides. Mr. Norris built it with considerable expertise. It was a well-made machine. And then she arrived at the east portico with her one trunk and her mended cuff and her composed face. And she walked into the library and put the books back when she was done with them. And she told Briggs the mare was bored and not possessed. And she wrote 3 pages of notes about the Southfield drainage in a neat small hand and left them on the desk with an apology for presuming. And she told him about the roses on the south wall of Wren's Crossing that had outlasted everything else. And she said she was glad of them. And the machine, which had been built to be a year and a clean exit, became instead a marriage. Not the legal fact of the marriage that had been there from the first week, but the real thing, the earned thing, the thing that is made of winter fires and dinner conversations, and a man standing in a kitchen garden longer than any errand could account for, and a woman who says the truth plainly and does not require you to do anything with it before you are ready. The best things I have observed are made that way, slowly and by people who are paying attention. He is paying attention now, and so is she, and that, I think, is the whole of it. What I have not yet told. The afternoon in early June when the rain came in off the coast and drove her indoors earlier than usual, and she came into the east corridor with her hair slightly damp from the kitchen garden, and found him standing in the hallway with a letter in his hand that he had clearly not been reading, standing still enough, long enough, for me to have passed twice on legitimate business without his having turned a page. She looked at him, he looked at her. It was a perfectly ordinary moment except for the quality of attention on both sides, which was not perfectly ordinary at all. "It is raining," she said. "It is," he said. He looked at the letter. He had remembered he was holding it. "I was thinking about something." "I did not mean to interrupt," she said. "You did not interrupt," he said. "I was not reading." She paused. The rain hit the east windows in a clean gust, and both of them looked at the window and then back at each other. "I have been meaning to ask you something," she said, and her voice had a different quality, still measured, still careful, but the care was of a different order now, not the care of self-protection, but the care of someone choosing words for a real reason. "About the house, the morning room. The windows face the avenue and the afternoon light is very good. I wondered whether you used it or whether I might for correspondence when the library is dark." He looked at her for a moment. "The morning room is yours," he said. "Every room in this house is yours." "The contract specifies the second-floor rooms," she said, with the smallest possible acknowledgement in her voice that she was aware of the absurdity of citing the contract in this context. "The contract," he said, "describes the minimum. You are not a minimum." He said it with a directness that was clearly not planned, that came out of somewhere below deliberation, and he heard himself say it and did not retreat from it. "Use any room you like." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. She began to use the morning room in the afternoons. This matters because the morning room was on the east side, and his study was on the east side, and the corridor between them was not long. He developed a habit, not announced, not remarked upon, of passing the morning room door when he moved between the study and the estate office. The door was sometimes open. When it was open, he did not go in. He slowed. I observed this without comment because I am a professional. The 3rd week of June, the estate manager, Mr. Hobbs, came about the North Pasture lease. The meeting ran long. Afterward, His Grace walked back through the east corridor and stopped at the open morning room door. She was at the desk. She looked up. "Hobbs has recommended renewing the North Pasture lease at the current rate," he said. Both of them were aware this was not the ordinary way of delivering estate news, and neither remarked on it. "The land has been improving. I am inclined to renegotiate." She set down her pen. "What is the current rate?" He told her. She thought about it, looking through the desk at something he could not see. "What has the improvement been?" He told her that too. "Renegotiate at 4%, she said. "Not more. A larger increase would be resented and could cost you the tenancy. Offer 4. If they accept without negotiating, the land is worth more than 4, and you will know it for next year." He was quiet for a moment. "Where does that come from?" "My father renegotiated farm leases for 30 years, she said. "I watched. He was very good at the practical things." A pause. "I am sorry. I have offered an opinion where you asked for none." "I walked past an open door and told you about a lease negotiation," he said. "That was asking." The corner of her mouth moved. Was it? It was. He looked at her a moment longer. 4%, he said. I'll tell Hobbs. He told Hobbs. Alderman's accepted without any counteroffer. His Grace noted this with the expression of a man filing information for next year. That evening at dinner, your father must have been a capable man. He was, she said, very capable at the practical and much less at the financial, which is a combination that destroyed many men of his generation. She looked at her wine. He would have liked Thornwall, the Southfield drainage especially. He spent most of his life trying to solve the same problem, and never quite had the resources. You solved it in 3 pages of notes, he said. I had access to resources he did not, she said. That is most of the difference most of the time. A pause. That was what I thought about you, actually, in the early weeks. He stopped. I beg your pardon. You had built a very efficient set of conditions for being the Duke of Thornwall, she said, looking at her wine, not evasively but carefully. Everything at a precise remove, nothing admitted that hadn't been approved in advance. She looked at him. It seemed very efficient, and I thought it must be rather tiring. He was quiet for a long moment. Was it obvious? Not to everyone, she said. I think to me because I had done something similar in a smaller register. Made myself very contained and very useful. Made myself someone who could get through things cleanly. She paused. I expect you understand that. He looked at her. I expect I do, he said. July, long evenings and the fullness of summer in a country house. They began to take evening walks along the Chestnut Avenue. It was her doing, or rather it was not a doing but a happening. She put on her shawl and said she was going to look at the sky, which was doing something worth looking at, and he put on his coat and went with her, and neither remarked on it, and it happened again the next evening and the one after. They talked while they walked, or they didn't. The walks admitted both equally. Some things are easier said while walking, when the side-by-side arrangement removes the obligation to look directly at the person one is speaking to, and the avenue and the rooks can receive what is not yet ready to be said face to face. She told him about the summers of her childhood in Wren's Crossing, the cliff walks, the light on the coast in August, the smell of the fishing boats. She told it without the nostalgia that requires you to go back, the nostalgia of someone who has understood that a time is done and loved it honestly all the same. He told her about his mother, about the house when she was alive, the morning room in the afternoons, the dining room every evening, the ordinary pleasant noise of a house inhabited by someone who liked it. About what the house had been after. I kept everything the same, he said one evening at the far end of the avenue. The rooms, the schedule, the staff, the routines, as exactly the same as I could manage. Because changing things would have meant admitting she was gone, she said. Yes, he said, something like that. A pause. I moved out of the Duke's suite 2 years after and had it closed. It seemed less requiring of something. Less requiring, she said. The plain acknowledgement of a real thing without embellishment. I have left a great deal closed, he said very quietly to the avenue rather than to her. That has been the pattern. She was quiet for a moment. Things can be opened again. In my experience, they need more airing than you expect, and then they are simply rooms. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite agreement. They walked back to the house in the long summer dusk. What I have not yet told, because it belongs after the dinner, after the hand held across the table, after the contract in the grate, is the morning 2 days later when I came into the library and found them both there. Not separately as they had been for weeks, she reading and he passing the door. Both seated, a book each, in the comfortable silence of people who have decided they can simply be in a room together without it requiring anything. He had brought his estate correspondence to the library. She was reading something agricultural. Neither of them appeared to find this remarkable. I collected the post from the hall and went downstairs and thought, that is what peace looks like when it has been earned. 2 people in a room being who they are, not performing anything for each other or for themselves. The autumn came. The chestnuts turned exactly as she had predicted, the avenue magnificent in October, burning orange and gold, the ground deep in leaves. She walked it every morning, sometimes alone, sometimes with him. He learned to walk slowly, which was not his natural pace. She learned to leave the garden notebook in the sitting room, which was not her natural mode. Neither mentioned these adjustments, which is what adjustments between people look like when the people are, at bottom, genuinely glad of each other's company. The boundary dispute resolved in September. The Yorkshire solicitor, having received her letter citing the 1803 ruling, wrote to settle. His Grace brought the letter to the morning room and set it on her desk without explanation. She read it, she looked up. 11 years, she said. The 1803 ruling, he said, as you told me in June. You laughed, she said. I laughed because I was surprised, he said. It was not the kind of laugh that meant I disagreed. I know that now, she said. I was less certain in June. You were less certain of a great many things in June, he said gently. I was, she said. I am more certain now. So am I, he said. November, the new documents from Norris. He read the letter at dinner and passed it to her. She read it and set it beside the wine. You did not have to do this, she said. The previous terms were not adequate, he said. They were what we agreed to. They were what I offered before I had the information to offer properly, he said. I had the information by April. I should have done this then. A pause. It was owed. What I am offering now is what should have been offered from the beginning, everything properly in your name. She was quiet. She looked at the document. She looked at him. It is a great deal to offer, she said. It is what there is, he said simply. I am not in the habit of giving fractions of things. He paused. I would like you to have the whole of it. She put out her hand. He took it in both of his, a gesture that was not in his usual range, not economical or contained, but simply full, unheld, and held it in the plain, certain manner of a man who has decided something. I will have it, she said. Good, he said, that is settled. December, the Christmas afternoon. Agnes, the schoolmaster's 4-year-old daughter, taking his Grace by the hand to show him the candlestick arrangement she had particularly admired. He stood where she led him and said the candlesticks were very fine. Agnes asked who had put them there. He said the Duchess and looked across the room. She was laughing at something the blacksmith's wife had said. She caught his eye. She gave him the look, not quite a smile and not its opposite, and he gave it back. Agnes tugged his hand toward the Christmas boughs and he followed. That is Thornwall House in December. I have been here for 19 years and I do not expect to leave it. It is a better house than it was when she arrived. The fires lit earlier, the doors opened, the kitchen making things worth eating, the gray mare ridden daily, the south field at full yield, the boundary dispute resolved, the third floor open, and in the evenings always the dining room lights burning past the hour at which they used to be put out. She walked into this house with one trunk and a mended cuff, and a composure that was not armor and not performance but simply herself. She put the library books back when she was done. She wrote 3 pages of drainage notes and left them with an apology for presuming. She told him the gray mare was bored and not possessed. She said the roses on the south wall of Wren's Crossing had outlasted everything else, and she was glad of them. And the Duke of Thornwall, who had signed a contract and said she was nothing more than it, discovered what a person can discover when they are given the particular conditions of someone being entirely themselves in proximity to them. That a thing can be, entirely and without warning, other than what you decided it was before you looked. The contract is ash in the grate, the rooms are open, the chestnuts come autumn will be very fine. I am Hewson. In 19 years, I have been wrong about one thing as completely, and as gladly as I could have wished to be wrong about anything. I was wrong to think she would not last the year. She will last, I believe, considerably longer than that, and the house with her, and him. There is one more thing I have not told, which is the evening in the second week of July when the kitchen sent up a supper tray by accident to the Duke's sitting room with 2 settings instead of 1, and nobody corrected it, and the 2 of them ate supper in his sitting room, not the dining room with its correct formality and its sideboard and its footman and me. Just the 2 of them informally in chairs pulled toward the low fire, with plates on their knees and the July light dying slowly outside, and no one to observe them behaving like ordinary people. I know about this because Mrs. Hatch told me about the tray, and because I saw the 2 settings return to the kitchen at 10 o'clock, and because both of them appeared at breakfast the next morning with the particular settled quality that a person has after an evening that has gone well in a way that is difficult to account for, where nothing remarkable happened, and something nevertheless shifted. I did not ask either of them about it. I am a professional. But I thought about it, because that is the kind of evening that is often more significant than the dramatic ones. The evening when nothing is arranged and nothing is performed, and two people are simply in a room together, informally, talking about whatever they feel like talking about, and find that they could do this rather indefinitely and would not mind. What I suspected they had talked about, and I should be clear that this is speculation, not observation, though 19 years of service is a considerable training in human inference, was the sort of thing that is easier to talk about in an informal setting with supper on your knee than across a long dining table with a footman at the sideboard. Things about themselves. The kind of things that people say when the space is small enough, and the light is low enough, and the company is trusted enough that the self-protective apparatus that governs more formal occasions is not quite sufficiently engaged to stop them. She had, I suspected, told him something about the years between Wren's crossing and the hired carriage to Thornwall. The period after the debts became public and before the contract was offered. The period, that is, of managed diminishment of selling first the horses, and then the paintings, and then the silver of the house reducing itself by degrees, of becoming someone who could get through things cleanly because getting through them cleanly was all that was available. She had not told him this at the dinner table, where it would have required a certain posture of dignity. She had told him, I suspected, over a supper plate in the firelight, with the matter-of-factness of someone who has decided the story is simply a story about what happened and does not need to be curated. And he had, I suspected, told her something about the year after his mother died, the year when he had moved himself room by room into the study wing and closed everything that reminded him of her, and had become, incrementally, the Duke of Thornwall in the most reduced possible sense. The man who ran the estate and attended to the legal and commercial business and ate adequately and was never ill and did not allow himself to want anything he did not have. He was very good at it. He had been very good at it for a long time. It required a great deal of maintenance. Neither of them, I think, had told these things to anyone else. They were not the sort of things one tells a solicitor or a dinner party. They were the sort of things one tells someone who has earned them, someone who has shown, by a sufficient weight of evidence, that they will not use the telling against you. They had, by July, earned them from each other. This is the thing about slowly built trust, which is more durable than the quickly made kind, but requires more time to recognize. It is built not in the dramatic moments, not in the signed contract or the overheard declaration or the hand held across the table, but in the accumulated minor events that precede them. In the fact that she always put the books back, in the fact that he told Hobbs 4% on her recommendation without asking her to justify it, in the fact that she did not press him about his mother in the morning room and he did not ask her about the years she did not describe, in the fact that they both, slowly, let each other see slightly more of themselves than was strictly required by the situation. Trust of that kind, once established, is not easily lost. It has been tested by too many ordinary days to come undone in a single evening, however that evening might go. It is, in my experience, the kind that lasts. I should also tell you about the garden, because the garden is part of it. The kitchen garden, which she had reorganized in March and April, was by midsummer productive beyond any of its recent precedents. The cook, who had been working with whatever the garden managed to produce under its previous purely ornamental regimen, was by June receiving fresh vegetables in a range and quantity that had not been available at Thornwall since his mother's time, and the kitchen responded accordingly. His Grace had remarked one evening at dinner that the soup was unusually good. She had said that the kitchen garden was now producing properly and that the cook was making excellent use of it. He had looked at the soup, then at her, then back at the soup. I had not realized it had been not productive, he said. It had not been for some years, she said carefully. He looked at the soup again. My mother grew vegetables there, he said. I had forgotten. She waited. She was a very good gardener, he said. She knew every plant by name. A pause. I have not been in the kitchen garden in I do not know how long. You could come tomorrow morning, she said. Between 8 and 9, while the light is good. I would be glad of your opinion on the espaliers. I have been retrained them by the book, but the head gardener says the book is not always right about the south wall. He looked at her, then he said, between 8 and 9. He came. I know because Briggs mentioned it. Briggs saw him come through the garden gate at 8:30, which was early for his Grace, and told the under gardener, who told the footman, who mentioned it in the kitchen, where it caused what I understood to be a small, private commotion of satisfaction. He came and he looked at the espaliers, and he told her what he remembered his mother doing with them in the 1840s, which was not in the book because it was a practical thing learned by doing. And she listened carefully and tried what he described, and the espaliers by September were perfect. He came back to the kitchen garden on several mornings after that. Not every morning. He had an estate to run, but often enough that it became a pattern, a gentle, reliable thing, and after a few weeks neither of them thought anything of it except that the kitchen garden was where both of them were on certain mornings between 8 and 9, which was coincidence, and was not coincidence in equal measure. The gardener told Mrs. Hatch, who told me, that His Grace had identified 3 plants by name on his 3rd morning in the kitchen garden, and had stood for a moment looking at them before moving on, which she said was difficult to interpret, but she thought was something to do with his mother. I did not disagree. There is also this. The night in late July when there was a thunderstorm of the kind that periodically comes in off the coast at Thornwall, and rattles the windows in a way that suggests the house's opinion of the weather and the weather's opinion of the house are not aligned. I was in the servants' wing at midnight when I heard, quite distinctly, voices in the east corridor, his voice and hers, both of them calm and distinct, which meant neither of them had been asleep. They were standing in the corridor with candles because the wind had put out the bracket lamps, and the storm was loud, and they were talking about it in the manner of people for whom being awake at midnight in a corridor during a thunderstorm is an occasion for conversation rather than any kind of emergency. She had apparently seen a storm take the roof off a barn at Wren's Crossing in the August of her 17th year. She was telling him, and she had been afraid of coastal storms ever since, not in a paralyzing way, just enough to make them impossible to sleep through. He had apparently stood in the high field at Thornwall during a storm in the autumn of his 22nd year, a few months after his mother died, and been struck, not by lightning but by the quality of the storm, which had seemed to him then to contain something necessary, something he could not have named. He told her this. He told it in a straightforward way, as a remembered fact, without elaboration. She said she thought she understood what he meant. The storm lasted another hour. I did not come out of the servants' wing. At breakfast the next morning they were both at the table. She was usually at the table. He rarely appeared before 9, and they were talking about the barn at Wren's Crossing, and whether the construction of Thornwall's north outbuilding was sufficiently sound to withstand a coastal storm at full strength, which led to a conversation about the outbuilding's roof, which wanted attention. He arranged for the roof to be surveyed that week. The surveyor confirmed it wanted attention. The repairs were conducted in August. These things, the garden, the storm, the roof survey, the supper tray with 2 settings, are not the story. They are what surrounds the story, what the story is made of underneath. They are the reason that when he came to the east corridor with a letter in his hand in June, and said the morning room was hers and she was not a minimum, she received it without surprise, not because she had expected it, but because she had enough of the context by then to understand what it meant. And when he came to the library in August and asked her to stay, not on the contract's terms but on different ones, the yes she gave him was not impulsive, and was not the yes of a woman who has run out of alternatives. It was the yes of someone who has looked carefully and over time at what a thing is, and has decided on clear evidence that it is worth having. That is the best kind of yes. It is the kind that holds. He knows that too. He is a man who pays attention to the weight of things, who does not mistake convenience for substance. He knew when she said yes that she meant it. He knew it because he knew her by then, had spent 5 months learning the shape of her, the texture of her, and a woman who puts the library books back and writes drainage notes with an apology for presuming, and does not press a man about his dead mother, does not say yes carelessly. He held her hand and said good, and it was the most carefully placed good I have heard in 19 years, and I speak as a man who has been listening carefully for a long time. Thornwall House in February is cold and quiet in the mornings, and the gray mare is difficult to exercise in the east fields when the frost is hard on the ground, and the chestnuts are bare, and the kitchen garden is dormant, and the third-floor rooms are warm because the fires there are now lit every day rather than never. The dining room is used every evening. The morning room is used every afternoon. The library is read in on most mornings by one or both of them, and the books are put back always when they are done. The south field will yield well in spring. The espaliers will fruit properly for the first time in 7 years. The boundary dispute is resolved. The schoolroom roof in the village is repaired. There is a plan, discussed over dinner in November, for the north outbuilding's windows. There is a plan, discussed on a walk in December, for the kitchen garden in March. What she will plant, in which beds, and whether the south wall will accommodate a new climbing variety she has read about that will be, if it does well, very fine. It will do well. She does not plan things that do not. And he will go with her to the kitchen garden on some of those mornings, between 8 and 9 in the March light. And he will stand beside her and identify the plants by name the way his mother taught him in the years when the morning room was used every afternoon, and the house was full of the ordinary warmth of someone who liked it. And the house will be full of that warmth again. It already is. I am Hewson, and the house is well. One more thing, because it is the right thing to end with. There was a morning in early September, after the boundary dispute had resolved, and before the new documents from Norris had arrived, when I came downstairs at 6 o'clock. Earlier than my usual hour, a loose window latch in the east corridor had needed attention at first light, and found her already in the kitchen garden. She was standing at the south wall with the espaliers in the September morning, which was clear and cold and still. She was not doing anything with the espaliers. She was simply standing and looking at them, the way she sometimes stood and looked at the chestnuts, not with need, not with analysis, but with the contained pleasure of someone who is precisely where they want to be. She heard me on the path. She turned. "Mr. Hewson," she said. "Your Grace," I said, "I did not know you were an early riser." "I have always been," she said. "At Wren's Crossing I walked the coast path before breakfast every morning. I had not done it since I came here." She looked at the espaliers. "I find I do not miss the coast path." I looked at the espaliers. They were coming along very well. "The south wall suits you," I said. She looked at me with the expression she used when someone had said something accurate in a way that was slightly more direct than they had perhaps intended. Then she said, "It does." We stood for a moment in the September morning, the two of us, looking at the espaliers and the south wall and the kitchen garden that she had reorganized in March from its ornamental uselessness into something productive, and beyond it the chestnut avenue in its September color. "I was wrong about this house," she said. She said it quietly, not to me exactly, but not away from me either. "When I arrived, I thought I understood what it was." "What did you think it was?" I asked. She thought about it. "A correct arrangement," she said, "everything running at a precise remove." Everything exactly as it had been. A pause. I did not think there was much in it that wanted to be otherwise. I looked at the kitchen garden, and now. She looked at the chestnuts in their September gold. "Now I think," she said, "that it was simply waiting for the right conditions." She went in for breakfast, and I went to attend to the east corridor window, and I thought about what she had said, which was not about the kitchen garden or the house, but about herself, and him, and the year, and the careful series of ordinary days that had brought both of them to a September morning looking at the espaliers on the south wall with the particular settled quality of people who know where they are. The right conditions. That is what she had given him, the conditions of someone being entirely themselves in his vicinity, steadily, day after day, without requiring anything of him that he was not ready to give. And he had given her the same, or tried to, in his careful and deliberate way, the conditions of someone who pays attention and means what he does and does not give fractions of things. They had given each other the right conditions, and then they had watched what grew. That is the whole of it. That is the account of the first year of the marriage of the Duke of Thornwall, which began with a contract and ended with a contract burned in the grate and everything that matters left standing, warm and clear on its own. I am Hewson. I have been in service for 19 years, and I do not expect to see anything more worth recording. Then again, I said she would not last the year, and I was wrong about that. I may be wrong again.